While everyone's eyes are locked on Bitcoin, something far quieter has been unfolding in the background, something most people completely missed, and that's exactly how the market likes it. When attention concentrates in one place, movement usually begins somewhere else. Bitcoin dominates headlines, thumbnails, and timelines, but markets don't reward attention, they exploit it, and right now, XRP is sitting in a very unusual position, one that hasn't appeared in years. This isn't about hype, and it's not about price predictions. This is about structure, timing, and behavior. Because when a signal disappears for years and then quietly reappears, it deserves to be examined calmly, not reacted to emotionally. Most people experience markets through charts and candles. Red feels bad, green feels good. But those visuals are just the surface. They don't show positioning, they don't show intent, and they definitely don't show patience. The real story is always happening underneath in the places that don't trend on social media. Right now, the majority of retail focus is exactly where you'd expect it to be. Bitcoin narratives are everywhere. ETFs, macro cycles, halvings, dominance charts. And none of that is wrong, but markets rarely move in straight lines, and they almost never reward the largest crowd first. XRP has always existed in a different lane. Not louder, not faster, just different. While many assets live and die by speculation cycles, XRP has been forced to evolve under pressure, regulation, and scrutiny. That kind of environment strips away noise over time and leaves only what actually works. What's interesting is not that XRP is moving, but how it's behaving while attention is elsewhere. Long periods of compression, reduced volatility, and declining emotional participation often precede structural shifts. Not explosions, not crashes, but transitions. This is where most people get uncomfortable. Nothing dramatic is happening. No fireworks, no urgency. And that's exactly why people stop watching. Markets don't need your attention to function. In fact, they often work more efficiently without it. When an asset goes quiet for long enough, two things usually happen. Weak hands leave, and time does its work. Time allows infrastructure to mature, narratives to cool, and expectations to reset. When that process completes, price no longer needs excitement to move. It needs alignment. XRP's current positioning feels less like a reaction and more like preparation. Preparation doesn't announce itself. It doesn't create viral clips. It just happens, slowly, consistently, and without permission. Another thing most people overlook is comparative behavior. Assets don't move in isolation. They respond to relative opportunity. When capital feels crowded in one trade, it looks for efficiency elsewhere. That doesn't mean it abandons Bitcoin. It means it diversifies attention, and attention is capital's shadow. What makes this moment unusual is how long it took to form. Signals that appear frequently lose meaning. Signals that vanish for years and then return quietly tend to matter more, not because they guarantee anything, but because they suggest conditions have changed. XRP has spent years being discussed, debated, dismissed, and misunderstood. That kind of history leaves a psychological footprint on the market. Expectations drop, interest fades, and when expectations are low, the system becomes more sensitive to real change. There's also a maturity factor. Markets evolve. Early phases reward bold narratives. Later phases reward durability. XRP has already survived what many projects never face publicly. That survival doesn't ensure success, but it changes the probability landscape. None of this means something dramatic has to happen tomorrow. In fact, expecting drama is often what causes people to miss the real shift. Structural changes don't rush, they unfold. This is why focusing only on price can be misleading. Price is the outcome, not the cause. By the time price confirms something obvious, positioning has usually already happened. The reason this moment feels different is not because XRP is loud again. It's because it isn't. Quiet markets with strong foundations tend to surprise people who confuse silence with stagnation. If you're still listening right now, take a second to support the channel by hitting like and subscribing. It helps keep these conversations grounded instead of drowned out by noise. Because what comes next isn't about hype. It's about understanding why attention shifts before price does, and why the market often whispers before it speaks. And that's where this story actually begins. Not with a sudden move on a chart, but with a shift in behavior that most people aren't trained to notice. Because markets speak in behavior long before they speak in price, and XRP right now is behaving very differently than it has during previous cycles. To understand why that matters, you have to step back from the screen for a moment and think about how attention shapes perception. When everyone is watching the same thing, expectations become crowded. Crowded expectations create fragile conditions. Any deviation feels dramatic even when it's it's not. Meanwhile, assets that sit outside the spotlight are free to develop without constant emotional pressure. XRP has spent a long time in that outside space, not ignored completely, but no longer at the center of every conversation. That changes who stays involved. The people left watching tend to be more patient, less reactive, and more focused on fundamentals than on day-to-day excitement. This matters because markets are not just numbers, they are reflections of collective behavior. When behavior stabilizes, price eventually follows. Not immediately, not predictably, but structurally. One of the quiet signals that hasn't shown up in years is consistency without volatility. That may sound boring, but it's rare. Assets usually either trend or fluctuate. Long periods of controlled movement suggest balance between buyers and sellers, not conflict. Balance doesn't last forever. It eventually resolves. Another overlooked factor is correlation. During times of heavy Bitcoin focus, many assets become tightly correlated, moving together regardless of individual progress. When that correlation begins to weaken, it suggests differentiation. Differentiation is where value discovery actually happens. XRP showing signs of independent behavior while Bitcoin dominates headlines is not random. It implies that some participants are looking beyond the obvious trade and positioning for something that doesn't rely on mass consensus. This doesn't require insider knowledge. It requires patience. Institutional thinking is rarely about predicting exact moments. It's about preparing for scenarios. Preparation looks boring until it suddenly isn't. There's also a psychological reset that happens when an asset spends enough time out of favor. People stop projecting unrealistic timelines onto it. They stop demanding immediate validation. Expectations normalize. That creates a healthier environment for genuine growth. Contrast that with assets constantly in the spotlight. Every delay feels like failure. Every pullback feels catastrophic. Emotional pressure builds, and that pressure often leads to poor decision making. XRP's long regulatory journey, regardless of opinion, forced a kind of discipline that many projects never develop. It couldn't rely on unchecked hype. It had to function under scrutiny. That environment filters out weak structures over time. Another aspect people miss is how infrastructure adoption actually happens. Large systems don't flip overnight. They integrate gradually. Testing phases don't show up on price charts. Pilot programs don't trend on social media, but they matter far more than temporary spikes. When an asset aligns with real-world use cases, its growth curve doesn't look like speculation. It looks uneven, slow, and often frustrating, but that kind of growth is harder to reverse. The reason this moment feels unfamiliar is because it doesn't fit the usual script. There's no clear villain, no explosive headline, no obvious trigger. It's subtle, and subtle changes are harder to market, but easier to sustain. People often ask why markets don't reward patience immediately. The answer is simple. If patience were rewarded quickly, it wouldn't be patience. The delay is the filter. XRP's current position reflects years of filtering. Filtering of expectations, filtering of participants, filtering of narratives. What remains is quieter, but more stable. This is also where risk perception changes. When an asset is constantly hyped, risk feels hidden. When an asset is quiet, risk feels exaggerated. That inversion often marks transition phases. None of this means certainty. Markets don't offer certainty. They offer probabilities, and probabilities improve when noise decreases. What's happening now is not a signal to rush. It's a signal to observe more carefully. Observation without urgency is one of the hardest skills to develop in markets. If you're still here, make sure you're subscribed. This kind of conversation doesn't chase moments, it explains them.